A few years ago, Kevin Tunnell was at a party. Kevin Tunnell was 17. He was at a high school party, and like most high school parties, he was at his friend's house, and they had alcohol there. Well, Kevin Tunnell, he drank too much. He got loaded, and he made a bad decision. He decided to drive home. Well, as Kevin's driving home, there was a car coming the opposite direction, a head-on crash. 18-year-old girl was killed in the crash. Kevin had to go to court and pleaded guilty. He was convicted of manslaughter, and he was sentenced. But here's the thing. The family decided not to send him to jail. The family decided that they were going to sue him for $1.5 million. But then they changed their minds about something else. They changed their mind, and they said, you know what? Judge, we'd rather have this. We just want him to pay $936. Now that sounds like a pretty reasonable thing. I mean, it sounds like he's getting off easy. But here's the stipulation with that. They said, Judge, we want him to pay us $936 in $1 increments. We want him to write out a check, one check every week for $1. And we want it sent to our house every single Friday. And so he did that. First week came around, he'd write out a check, write $1 on it, he'd mail it to them. Months went by. He did this pretty faithfully. As time went by, started to grind on him. It started to just wear on him the fact that every single week, he has to write out a check that reminds him every week of the crime that he did. So he'd write it out. So then one day he decided, I'm going to fill out all the rest of the checks and just send it to him at once, send it to the family at once. And the parents got the checks and they threw them out and they said, no, that's not our deal. We don't want that. We want you to send us $1 every week until the $936 is over. So he decided to stop paying. He said, I just can't do this. It's starting to wear me down and you know, it's starting to kill me. And they said, Judge, this was our deal. So he had to do a couple months of community service and he had to pick it up and do it again. The parents, they refused the offer to take the bulk of it. They wanted vengeance. They wanted vengeance for what he did. They wanted to remind him every single day of what he did, and they wanted to hold him guilty. And here's what the mother said. She said, we want to receive a check every week on time. He must understand that we are going to pursue this until the end. We will go back to court every month if we have to. We want him to remember. They wanted to torture him. I mean, that sounds like a pretty tough situation. I don't want to make light of the situation. I mean, these parents, they lost their daughter. That's huge. I don't want to just gloss over that. That's bigger than I can possibly imagine. They lost their daughter, but then they demanded that this guy pay them every single week and that he be held accountable every single week. $936. That is $1 a week for every week that the girl lived up until the age 18. And so that's why they wanted $936. They didn't need the money. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to keep this guy in a mental prison. They wanted to keep him trapped up here. But here's the interesting thing. By the parents doing that, by the parents trying to keep him up here in a mental prison, they kept themselves in a mental prison as well. They carried this around with them. They carried this around, but they didn't have to. It was their choice to carry it around because they were unwilling to forgive. We all know something about forgiveness. If I were to ask somebody to come up here, any one of you, I'm sure, to come on up here and just, I'm not going to do it, but just, if I were to ask you, come on up here, just tell me something about forgiveness. I'm sure everybody can talk for a few minutes. I mean, you might not be able to talk for 2 hours on this subject, but we all know something about forgiveness. Whether we've seen somebody forgive us for something we did, maybe we forgave somebody else, maybe we're having trouble forgiving someone. If you were to come up here and tell us your story about why you were having trouble forgiving someone, we would probably listen to that and say, man, that is a horrible story. That's bad. How do you deal with that? No wonder you carry around such anger, and we would all sympathize with you. See, on all levels, we know something about forgiveness. And that's good, because that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about forgiving others. We're going to be looking at this parable about forgiving others. Now, a few weeks ago, Shegs mentioned some guidelines when we read into parables. There's some guidelines or rules that you have to read into parables with. And Jesus would tell these parables, and he would do this. And when he would do it, there would be one main idea that he was trying to get across in these parables. There was one main point. These parables weren't meant to be dissected and have every single little detail pulled out of them and applied. They're meant for one big picture. And Jesus, he told these parables in response to a question, or he would tell them in response to a certain situation that was going on. Well, the parable that we're going to be looking at tonight is found in Matthew chapter 18, and it's also on that paper that you were handed out. And what's going on here is Jesus is answering a question that Peter asked. In Matthew 18, Jesus is talking about conflict resolution. Maybe in the church you've heard about people say, we're having a problem, blah, blah, blah. I'm having a problem with that person, and you say, well, you need to follow the Matthew 18 model. Basically, in a nutshell, what that's saying is you need to go to that person you're having a problem with and address the situation with them. Don't go over, if I'm having a problem with Ryan over here, I'm not going to go over here, and I'm not going to find Jeff over here and tell him about it. Matthew 18 says I need to go talk to Ryan about it. That's what Matthew 18 says. And then it says, okay, now suppose Ryan doesn't listen to me. So then Matthew 18 says, okay, go get somebody else and bring them along. That's kind of what Jesus is saying in Matthew 18. Basically, he's saying we just have to go to the person directly. So Jesus is telling this parable and these rules for conflict resolution. And Peter, he's sitting there listening to this whole thing. Now, Peter, somewhere along the line, as Peter's listening to this teaching, he gets stuck on a thought. Have you ever done that? Have you ever heard the guy talking up front, and then as the guy continues talking, like something he said just made your mind stick on one thought, and you're stuck there, and the guy keeps on talking? I've done that. I've seen your faces. I've seen faces of other people do it. But that's what happened to Peter. Jesus is talking, and Peter, he's stuck on this thought, and Jesus goes on teaching. So apparently what happened to Peter, apparently somebody offended Peter. Now, we're not sure when, we're not sure how many times it happened, but somebody offended Peter. So Peter's kind of going over this scenario in his mind. And he has a question. He starts to wonder, Jesus, how many times should I forgive this person? How many times should I forgive this person that offends me? And then Peter says, he goes, should I forgive him 7 times? See, the religious leaders of that day, they said that you should forgive somebody 3 times. So Peter here, he's trying to say, hey, look how great a disciple I am. I'm going to double that, and then I'm going to add one. I'm awesome. I'm going to say, Jesus, should I forgive them 7 times? So Peter's like, should I forgive them 7 times? And Jesus, he said, no, you should forgive them 70 times 7. Peter's like, what? 70 times 7. Jesus isn't saying forgive them 490 times, which is 70 times 7. He's not saying forgive them 490 times and then on the 491st time, then they're guilty from there. See, because here's why. If you keep track of how many times you forgive them, you never forgave them the first time. So Jesus is saying, in response to Peter's question, Jesus is saying, forgive them unlimited times. And so then Jesus goes on to explain this parable to them, to kind of set up his illustration for what he just told them. So here's what he says in the parable. He said, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. A talent in that day was a measure of currency. 1 talent equaled about 20 years' wages. And so this guy owes the king 10,000 talents. That's equal to the salary of about 200,000 years. It is an unpayable debt. So, here we go. So it says, since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything, which he wouldn't be able to do. I will pay back everything." The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. 1 denarii is worth about 1 day's wage. So he owed him like 3 months' worth of wages. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell on his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I'll pay you back." That's the same thing that the first servant said to the king. Did the same thing. But he refused. Instead, he went off and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said. "I canceled that debt of yours because you begged me to." Now this is the point of the whole parable. "Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In his anger, the master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all he owes. This is how it is with my heavenly Father. This is how my heavenly Father would treat you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. I don't know about you, but listening to that story, it just kind of ticks me off. You know, looking at the different amounts. He was owed $1 billion to the king, and the king's like, "You know what, you don't have to pay me." And then he goes out after another guy, and the guy owes him like two grand, and he slaps the guy and chokes him, and has him thrown in jail. I want to ask you, what's your problem, man? You know, look how much you were forgiven. You've been forgiven so much. How could you not forgive? So that's what I want to focus on tonight. I want to focus on 2 reasons why we need to forgive others when they hurt us. And then at the end of the message, we're going to look at some practical ways that we can do that. So the first reason that we need to forgive others when they offend us, the first reason is because forgiveness is expected by God. Forgiveness is expected by God. In this parable, who was the king? Who did the king represent in this parable? God, right? Who was the servant that got forgiven? Us. And here's what it says in verse 33. "Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servants just as I had on you?" The point of the extremes in the money, the billions of dollars worth of 2,000 versus the $2,000 is like how much God has forgiven us versus how much we forgive others when they offend us. You know, there's really no comparison between the two amounts. We've offended God so much more than others offended us. Yet he chooses to forgive us of everything. He chose to forgive us everything. So, you know, when we choose not to forgive somebody, God's like, "How dare you? You know, how dare you not forgive?" As you look in the Bible, forgiveness isn't just a small thing, it's everything. God has forgiven us so much more than we could ever imagine. That's the point of this parable. He forgave a debt that is unpayable. And because of that, he expects us to forgive others freely. You know, when Jesus was hanging there on the cross, after he's been beaten and his hands had nails through them and he was bleeding and his feet had nails through them, in that horrible state, in a horrible physical state, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." When Jesus said that, he wasn't approving of what they were doing. He wasn't saying, you know, "I psychologically understand that they came from a bad background and this and justifying that." He's saying, "God, forgive them." He was surrendering his right to hurt them by hurting him, for hurting him. He's canceling the debt that they owe him. They stole something from him. They stole his life. And by him choosing to forgive them, he's saying that the debt that they now owe him because they stole his life, the debt that they owe him is canceled. That's the way it works with us too. When we've been wronged by somebody, when something's happened to us, when someone has hurt us, something has been stolen from us. You know, maybe it was an absentee father who wasn't there in your life. He stole something from you. He stole your childhood from you. He stole a close-knit family from you. Maybe it was somebody who gossiped about you and spread rumors about you. They stole your reputation. Maybe God forbid, somebody was sexually abused. That person stole your innocence and your feeling of safety. Whenever somebody's done something wrong to us, they have stolen something from us. That's why forgiveness, that's why it goes against our very human nature. You see, because we want to say, something was stolen from me, and if I forgive them, essentially, they're going to be stealing from me a second time. They're going to be stealing from me the right to get back at them for what they did. And so here's what happens. Here's what happens when we don't forgive and when we carry this stuff around with us. We walk around with us. Somebody, maybe a father wasn't there when we were little, so we walk around with that on us. We don't let it go. And then something else happens to us. Maybe we get fired from a job, from the boss, and then we have another layer that we're putting on, and we're not forgiving. We're carrying that around with us. And then something else happens. Maybe you're dating somebody, and they cheat on you. You get another layer. And maybe things eventually start to irritate you more and more and more, and you put more and more layers on. The smaller things irritate you, and you still put layers on because you're not forgiving, and you're carrying this attitude around. And then you go to the gas station, and the guy gives you the wrong change, and he won't correct it, and you put another layer on. And then you go to Panera Bread, and somebody looks at you funny, and you put another layer on. And you're carrying all this stuff around with you, and a cop, he pulls you over, and you put another layer on. And you're carrying this around. And then here's what happens. You go to church, and you start to sing and worship God, and you say, God, you have my everything. You have my all. I give it all to you. And he looks at you, and he says, you got to be kidding me. Look at you. Look at what you're carrying around. I don't have your all. Your unforgiveness shows it. And then it says here in Matthew 5:23, it says, if you enter your place of worship and are about to make an offering, and you suddenly remember a grudge a friend has against you, abandon your offering, leave immediately, go to the friend and make things right. Then, only then, come back and worship God. God's saying, don't carry this to my altar and tell me that I give my all to you. Don't say that. How difficult, bro, would it be to worship up here with this? Can't be done, And that's what God's saying. God's saying, I forgave you everything so that when people offend you, when people wrong you, just get rid of it, Because I've forgiven you so much. That's what he's saying. So that's the first reason that we need to forgive, is because God expects us to forgive. He doesn't want us to carry that around. Now, the second reason that we choose forgiveness. Forgiveness offers freedom from the prison of your mind. Forgiveness offers freedom from the prison of your mind. One of the commentaries that I looked at while I was preparing for this message said this. It said, there is no worse prison than the prison of your mind. I read that. I'm like, man, that is so true. Think about our minds. They go with us everywhere. Every thought, every conversation, every relationship, they go with us everywhere. And we have unforgiveness in our lives. It travels around with us. Everywhere we turn, there it is. It's right there. And what happens is it becomes the filter. It becomes the filter that we evaluate things from. It's kind of like if you put a pair of sunglasses on, then everywhere you go, you're going to be seeing through that pair of sunglasses. Everything is going to be affected by those sunglasses, the same way with unforgiveness. Is we are going to carry that around with us. And we're going to evaluate everything through that unforgiveness, and we're going to carry bitterness around with us. And what happens is, layer by layer, brick by brick, we're building the wall around us. We're building it higher, we're building it deeper. so that nobody can get to us. We're keeping everybody out. But what's happened is we're also stuck behind that wall with all the offenses and all the hurts that we refuse to let go of. When we choose to be unforgiven, it affects everything about us. It affects our relationships with our families, our friends, people who are close to us. It affects everything. Unforgiveness, it becomes like a chain that ties us to the past. Unforgiveness keeps us tied to the events in the past and prevents us from moving forward in life. Here's the truth of the whole thing. You'll never be happy in life. You'll never experience the life that God has for you and the true freedom that He has for you as long as you're holding on to those old hurts. Now think back to those parents who wanted the $1 every week. They're stuck. They're stuck. They're unable to move forward beyond the event, beyond the hurt, because they're stuck right in that, because they are choosing to be chained to the past. Whatever is holding you back is going to rip the peace out of your lives. You're not going to have it. As long as you're unwilling to forgive, here's the thing. God is going to allow you to remain in your tormented mind. He's going to allow you to remain in the torment of your mind. Not only that, I mean, when you carry that around, you're going to be affected physically. You're going to have stress and panic attacks and everything else. And God is going to allow you to reap the consequences of that decision not to forgive. And He allows us to go through that so that the consequences may wake us up, may change us, may bring us to the place where we do forgive. And then we become more like Him. See, but if we refuse to change, He's going to allow us to remain in that tormented state, just like the servant in our parable. Now, see, many times people are going to say they forgave somebody. And when you ask them, did you forgive somebody? Do you forgive them? And they're like, yeah, I forgave them. I forgave them. Why are you saying it like that? I don't think you did, if that's the way you're saying it. Or they'll say this one, they'll say, yeah, I forgave him, but. You know, anytime there's a but on the end of I forgave him, there is not forgiveness there because there's something attached to that. Or, how about this one? Sometimes people, when they're hurt, they try to push the hurt deep down inside. They try to bury the hurt, and they think it goes away, but then, years later, they're walking through the mall, and they see that person. They see that person, and all the hurt comes flooding back to them, and all the bitterness and the feelings comes flooding back to them. Not all wounds get better with time. Many of them get worse, and they go untreated. Our hurts, they need to be addressed correctly and not just shoved down deep. They need to be addressed correctly. Now, check this out. This is where the great news comes in. See, forgiveness, it's a choice that we make. It's a decision. We can never escape the hurts until we choose to get rid of them. God tells us. He tells us we need to get rid of them. And He says, and until we do, we're going to carry this around. But here, He says, but when we're ready to get rid of them, when we choose to get rid of them, He's going to help us. He's going to help us break the chains of those destructive hurts that we're linked to in our past. Now, what I want to do is I want to take some time and as we wrap this up, a few more minutes here, I want to look at some practical steps that we can use to move us out of that hurt zone, and remove the layers that we have maybe built up in our lives over the years. What I want to do is we're going to look at this in 4 different steps. On the back of your paper, you should have the section where you can write some of this stuff down. The first step in the healing process is to ask God for help. In this room, I think we'd be absolutely shocked to hear people's stories, to hear what happened to people. I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to make this sound like it's a light thing that, just forgiven because, what happened to you wasn't that big of a deal. That's not what we're saying here. I mean, the severity of some of the stuff would absolutely floor us. I mean, people in this room, I'm sure, have been offended physically, verbally, emotionally. When that happens, you're a victim of that offense. You get tied to that offense. And God knows that as long as you're unforgiving, you continue to remain a victim of that offense. God wants you to break that offense and become a forgiving person. Not because the person that offended you deserved it. Not because what they did wasn't terrible. But because God forgave us. Because God forgave us, and He expects us to forgive others, and we're never going to experience healing in our lives until we do. Now, most likely, you hear forgive and forget a lot. Most likely, you're not going to be able to forget the event that happened. It's something that happened in your life. It's something that happened there. I mean, it's like forgetting 2 plus 2. It's not going to happen. But here's the thing. When you forgive somebody, and then you think back to that event, it's not going to hurt you anymore. You're not going to be chained to it anymore. You see, something's going to change in you, and you're going to view that event with different eyes. And God wants to help you go through that. He wants to help you get beyond the hurt. And most times, the only way possible to start to move in that direction is with His help. So ask Him. That's the first step in the process. Ask God for help. Second step, admit that you have unforgiveness. Admit you have unforgiveness. Take an honest look, an honest evaluation in your life. Couple questions here. You could write these down. Are there people that you don't want to talk about? Are there people you don't want to talk about? Another one. Is there anyone that when you hear their name, you get all tense inside? Another one. Is there anyone that you're having imaginary conversations with? And I don't mean some abstract figure. I mean a real person that you have these conversations in your mind with. And you almost envision this encounter, and then you talk about, you confront these people in your mind, and then they talk back to you. And here's what happens when I have these imaginary conversations in my mind. First of all, I always win. I always win the conversation. And there's always other people around to hear me win. They're always around to hear me give them that zinger. And say, man, you showed him. These imaginary conversations are indications that you have something towards somebody. Also, ask people that are close to you. A lot of times, people in our lives can see something in us that we may not even be aware of. They can see you react towards a certain person. Or when they bring a name up, they can see your demeanor change. Ask people that are close to you. Look, is there anybody that you're aware of that I'm not forgiving? Are there any major events in your past? I don't think I put a line on there for this one. But are there any major events in your past that you're aware of where you were offended or hurt by somebody, and who was involved in that event? These are some things that are going to help you get to the point of admitting that there was an offense and pinpointing the people who you're being unforgiving towards. Now the third step, and this one is critical, identifying what was stolen from you. Like we talked about before, when you were wronged, somebody stole something from you. So what you need to do is specifically identify what that was. See, because here's the thing, you can't forgive somebody unless you know what you're forgiving them from. If you were dating somebody and they cheated on you, they stole from you. They stole your ability to trust people and your dreams of starting a life together. If your father left you when you were an infant, he stole from you. He stole from you, having a close family and a male figure in the house. He stole something from you. If someone writes all kinds of junk about you on Facebook, and trashes you. Maybe they tell secrets about you. Maybe they told lies about you, whatever it is. They stole your reputation with other people. They stole something from you. You have to identify what was stolen from you before you could forgive the person. Specifically identify what it is. After you've done that, after you've done those things, after you've admitted the issue, the person you have a problem with, after you've prayed to God about it and asked for His help, you've identified the problem. The final thing is, have a ceremony. Take all that information, all that specific information, and what you want to do is you want to have a physical time of saying, at this point, I am choosing to forgive. I forgive this person, and I'm not going to hold this offense against that person anymore. They really do owe me something because they stole from me. But I'm not going to hold them to that debt. I'm releasing them of that debt. Have a ceremony. Write a letter to the person. Say you're forgiving them. You don't even have to send it. Just write a letter, say I'm forgiving you, fold it up, and put it in a box in your closet. I heard of one lady, she wrote a letter, and then she buried the letter in her backyard, and then she took a little cross and she put the cross on top of it. I heard of another guy, he wrote down, to a couple people that he forgives them, and then what he did was he crumbled the paper up, little ball, and then he threw it in the toilet and he flushed it. He did a burial at sea. Because he didn't want to have the chance to retrieve it once again and say, you know what, I'm backing out of this offer. He wanted to write it down, forgive it, and send it out. Have a physical time. Have a time to mark the occasion that you choose to forgive those people. And you want to do these things without them being contingent upon the other person apologizing. See, even though they never apologize, they may never apologize. Look at it this way. If someone comes to you and apologizes, they probably wouldn't be able to give back what they took from you. If your father, if he left you and wasn't there all while you were growing up, and your mom had to work, day and night shifts and struggle to make ends meet, and he just wasn't there for all your events, and he comes to you in the future, he comes to you as an adult, while you're an adult, and he says, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not being there. I see how I was wrong. I'm sorry. And then, you would say, hey, I appreciate you coming to me with this. I appreciate that. And he says, I want to make it up to you. I want to make up for the time I wasn't there. I'm sorry. And then you say, I appreciate that. But, honestly, the truth is you can't make it up to me. You can't go back and correct what happened in time. You can move forward. You can invest in the future. But you can't go back and make up for lost time. But from this point forward, we can have a relationship. In Joel 2:25, God tells Israel, He says, I will restore back to them the crops that the locusts have eaten. See, what happened was these locusts came in. He devoured the crops. And God's like, I'm going to restore back to you the crops that the locusts have eaten. Now, God wasn't saying, I'm going to take the actual physical crops that the locusts have eaten, make them throw it back up again or whatever, and I'm going to put those crops back here. He's saying, I'm going to bless the ground, and I'm going to bring new crops up from that ground. And that's the same thing that it works when, say it once again, our illustration, say, if the Father comes back to you, God's going to say, I can bless your relationship from here on forward. I can bless that and bring stuff up from that. Now, the only way that we could break the chains that are holding us to the event of the past is to forgive like God forgave us. That's the point of the parable. And He wants us to forgive. He wants us to forgive unconditionally, completely, never bringing it up again. Never going back and revisiting that. And when you do, you're going to be shedding off the layers that you've been carrying around all these years. You're going to be shedding them right off. And then what you're going to do also in the process is you are going to be imitating God. And that's what He wants us to do.